Thank you. We come to the last knockings of a process that has gone on for an extraordinarily long time, don't we? We've been here again and again and again with this local plan. I was involved in some of the initial discussions back in 2008 about the regional spatial strategy and the campaign that was run by our MP at the time. I remember it well, no way to 10k. Today what we hear is perhaps this council will be saying yes way to 13.7k. An interesting change in perspective over that decade or so. It's also quite salutary to note that the government minister who was responsible for housing when the MPPF was brought in was one very Grant Shapps, wasn't it? Which is quite an interesting perspective on the development of a planning system that we are now looking at and saying it's just not how it should work. 14 years to come to a conclusion on a local plan. And a local plan that has engendered such controversy and upset is a quite astonishing achievement of a national planning system that, in my view, is pretty much circling the drain. I have little sympathy with the administration on this particular issue because it is a Conservative government that is pushing these policies and regulations onto this Conservative administration. Perhaps the conversations that you should have been having were those in the corridors of power to say, this system doesn't work. It doesn't work in Welwyn Hatfield. It's not working around the rest of the southeast of the UK. It's not working in the blue wall seats, is it? If you want to see a sensible local plan, in my view, we should just draw a line under this entire sorry situation and start again. I will not vote to damage my community. That is what the proposal on the table does. It just won't do it. That's not what I was elected to do.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, Councillor Platt.
Thank you, Mayor. As a new councillor, you come in and you sit on panels and you sit in meetings, and I'm on the CPPP panel that voted a couple of weeks ago. And when you look at these things, I looked at the local plan when I first came in and I thought, is this council mad? And then you sort of look into it and you see some reasons for things. Then what happened last week? The CPPP said they were going to come back with a new proposal with 13,277 dwellings. Well, the revised plan that came out of Cabinet last week and has been proposed and presented today is absolutely and completely unacceptable for the people of Welwyn Garden City and in particular Pear Tree Ward. I'm going to give you some figures to illustrate that, and I'm going to tell you why. This document here that we've all been reading there, it keeps mentioning proportionate, proportionate, proportionate. Let me tell you what's not proportionate. Pear Tree takes up just 1.3% of the landmass of the whole borough. Broadwater Road West, where most of this development is going to go, just takes up 0.08%, not even 1,000th of the landmass of the borough. Yet this plan proposes 18% of all development will go in that tiny little space. 18%. I mean, that's just mad. It's a 450-metre bit of road, and 18% of the borough's development's going in there. What I want you to think about is this. That's 1 in every 5 dwellings built in the whole of Welwyn and Hatfield is going to be built in one small stretch of road. That's a higher density in that road than Kentish Town, Colindale, Tower Hamlets, Dalston and King's Cross. That's madness. It's absolute madness. And it's not just Broadwater Road West. That's just the west side of the road I'm talking about. I haven't even mentioned 29 Broadwater Road, 35 Broadwater Road, 50 Broadwater Road, the Norton Building, Bridge Road East, Campus East and various others around the corner. And of course there's more on other various areas of Welwyn Garden City. I do understand that Broadwater Road is more sustainable than other areas. I do get that. I do agree with that. And I do understand that we need housing. But let me say this, and I'm going to say it loud and clear. More than enough has already been approved on Broadwater Road. It's enough. There's 1,400 already approved, and they're trying to put more on. Pear Tree cannot and will not be a dumping ground for development that other areas don't want. You think I'm wrong? I'm not wrong. Look at the last two major applications that went to DMC. The DMC members rightly looked at them and they threw them out because they are not sustainable for where they are being placed. The public see this as an outrage. I can guarantee you this, I'm in my ward every day, it's an outrage. And you and me as a council, we need to see it. Any councillor, and I'm going to say this, and it doesn't matter, any councillor who cares about Welwyn Garden City and any councillor who represents Welwyn Garden City cannot vote for this skewed, biased and flawed plan. It's absolutely true to say right here and now that this amount of development in the middle of the town will be the beginning of the end of the Garden City. You'll remember at CPP we spoke about listening to the people that we represent. Councillor Tusu quite rightly said it. Well, the people are watching us right now. They are watching how we vote, and I have no doubt the people will remember how we vote when it comes to the elections. So we have a choice of what to do next. I know what my choice will be, and I know what side of history I'll be on when this is all done and dusted. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Platt. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try and get through this as quickly as I can because I understand there's a number of people that want to speak on this important issue, and I appreciate that we only get one chance to speak tonight, so I'll try and get everything out. The local plan, core strategy, or whatever else you want to call it, has finally run out of road, and those that brought us here finally now have to stare into the reality of their own doing. I find it absolutely laughable that after so many years, so much cost, and repeated warnings from the opposition that this was a path to ruin, now only at the very end has the penny dropped of what this process is all about. I watched the last CPPP meeting and was quite surprised to see many councillors didn't remember or understand how we got to this stage. I appreciate many of them are new. So let me take you back to 2008, and I think best done with an email from Grant Shapps to local residents. In it, he was bemoaning the regional planning process that was going to force this council to build 10,000 houses. 10,000. Dear resident, the government loves its consultations, but the reality is that when push comes to shove, we discover they've already made up their mind. He goes on to say that we'd already built 4,000 homes of that target in Welwyn Hatfield, so you can't call us NIMBYs, but we can't accept a further 6,000 driven by a top-down target. 6,000. I return to the MP's words. What we really need are decisions driven by local communities who are incentivised to create homes for local people, not top-down decisions directed by ministers from Whitehall, Grant says. Despite 11 years in power, this government still hasn't learned that its target-orientated, centrally driven approach to everything can't possibly provide the services that we need, and it will fail to provide the right kind of housing in the right locations too. What we need is an approach based on local decision-making. When Conservatives have the opportunity in government, we'll ensure that it's local communities who are put back in the driving seat. Amazing words when you consider where we are now. Because of course, not too long after that email, Mr. Shapps and his friends were given the opportunity in government, supported then by their friends, the Liberal Democrats. And what did they do? Well, they all got on a big blue bus. On one side, it had a message, no way to 10K. On the other, it said localism, driven by the local MP and carrying many current and former cabinet members of this council, popping champagne corks and celebrating, it drove headlong into that gap between the rock and the hard place. And it has sat there ever since at a cost of nearly £9 million to this council. That's how we got to where we are now. This is a Conservative plan marshalled by the entire time by a Conservative government, Conservative ministers, and a succession of Conservative cabinets leading this council. And I think it's quite clear now, it has not delivered anything that was promised when Welwyn Hatfield's MP was celebrating defeating the proposal to build just 6,000 homes in Welwyn Hatfield. If anything, it has made every observation made in that email much, much worse. Higher housing targets, less protection for the Greenbelt, no infrastructure guarantees, and the bit that you've only just worked out after all these years is that it's completely driven in a top-down way by a government-appointed inspector who holds all the cards and has no connection to Welwyn Hatfield. I don't want to hear about the benefit of hindsight. This group, the Labour Party, has at every single meeting said this was going to end in disaster, every time. I sat in those meetings and I remember asking about the objective assessment of need and asking why there was no social housing mentioned at all. It didn't sound very objective. I queried a report looking at strategic infrastructure requirements. Where's the hospital, the schools, everything else? Oh, that comes later on, after all the houses are built, if we're lucky. The very notion that we can only build new schools if a private company is first going to make lots of money is just wrong. It doesn't sound very strategic. I remember another meeting when the agenda was changed during the meeting itself. Out went a loose plan to spread housing sites across Welwyn Hatfield, and in came new plans, plans that no one had seen before, cramming it all into Welwyn Garden City and Hatfield, so that some of the villages had nothing. The inspector, of course, threw that out, but that's more or less what you've returned to tonight at the 11th hour. This is your defiant stand, hoping that even though you've been told in no uncertain terms you can't do it, maybe, just maybe, everything will work out okay in the end. And given how this whole sorry saga has played out, who knows? Maybe it will, or maybe it will continue to get even worse. But make no mistake, this is your plan, this is your doing. Only it's Welwyn Hatfield and everyone in it that's going to suffer. Amazingly, 12 years after the process begun, you've got Conservative cabinet members saying this process is flawed. Indeed it is. Some of us were saying that more than 10 years ago. Now I know that faced with the demands you've been given by the inspector and the fact that you are now out of options and out of time, you'd rather try and wash your hands of it and defy those demands. Even if it means losing control of the planning process, even if it means higher houses building happening, even if it means someone else making all the decisions. After 12 years, £9 million, you've decided, actually, no thanks. We don't want this Conservative localism after all. What a waste of everyone's time this has been. It is quite clear local communities have not been put back in the driving seat. They've been thrown under the bus. No one is happy, that much is clear. To conclude, Mr. Mayor, I've never voted for this plan, never agreed with it. I've sat through much of the early stages saying it was wrong, and I'll continue to say that now. I won't be voting to accept any of these recommendations, and I cannot accept any suggestion you did not all know this day was coming, when all those promises about empowering local communities would turn out to be just as empty as anything else this government has done to local councils the entire sorry time it has been in power.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I've never been a supporter of the view that, as a councillor, or a member of Parliament for that matter, that one is elected purely to voice and vote for the demands of constituents. I believe that in a representative democracy, we have the responsibility to listen to the views of our constituents and put them forward in discussions. But when it comes to any sort of vote, we should be guided by what, in all conscience, we believe to be the best course of action, based on the deeper knowledge we may have of the impact of that decision, whatever it is that's being called for. Sometimes very hard decisions need to be made. This is one of those decisions or situations which tests that principle to the nth degree. We know that many of our residents don't want this plan to be approved, but we fear the consequences if we do not do so. The undesirable scenario of planning by appeal has been clearly laid before us. I have always believed that whatever the formula that is being used in the arguments, the number of dwellings that are being required of our borough is totally disproportionate. Many of the developments fly totally in the face of the spirit of the Garden City movement. The Garden City was created and built to enable people to escape from London, but what is happening is that London is being stealthily brought to us. It has been said time and time again that these developments will not meet local needs. We won't have the infrastructure to support them, and like many small towns in the orbit of London, we're being treated as collateral damage in the need to supply homes that once upon a time would have been affordable in the capital and its suburbs, but are no longer. I believe that the basis on which we are being asked to approve this revised local plan i.e., give us these numbers or it will be the worse for you further down the line, is a principle that should be left firmly in the realms of television drama. We should not be trying to appease the government in this way. Caving in never ends well. What we are being told to do is just wrong. And rather than trying to be accommodating, we should not hesitate to call it out as such. And for this reason, I cannot bring myself to support the option being proposed, and I will be voting to reject it. Thank you.
Thank you, Siobhan. Councillor Quinton.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There are no good solutions to the local plan at this point. 15,200 homes and any plan which requires building on Simon's Hyde is not an option. 13,279 homes which requires overdevelopment in Welwyn Garden City is not an option. A failed local plan is also not an option we should have to face either. So how did we get to this point? In short, the failure of this administration to face up to hard decisions and their consequent manipulation of the choices. There are many instances of delays and local plan policies that have been ignored to suit their agenda, and they have consistently failed to listen to all the residents' views. They have also failed to listen to the inspector's guidance, an inspector who is only implementing the policies their own government have chosen. This administration has let everyone down by failing to take the local plan seriously over the many years it has been in discussion. And Welwyn Hatfield residents deserve much better. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Quinton. Councillor Hayes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. When I look back at my time as a member of CPPP since 2015, I tried to think of any success I've had in shaping this local plan, and there is one. And that was the complete removal of the Hatfield Fire Station from the plan before it was submitted in 2017. All other arguments, concerns about evenly balanced growth throughout the borough, coalescence between Hatfield and Welwyn Garden City, destroying Pansanger Park, lack of travel infrastructure to support key bottlenecks such as Cooper's Green Lane, putting Simon's Hyde into the plan even though it really only had consultation through the developer and not years of consultation that other large strategic areas had been afforded by the council. All this and lots more fell on deaf ears as the meeting to pick sites at the end of 2016 was upon me. I can remember in that meeting the leader of the council at the time was sitting in as an observer, and as we went through the site selection it was clear for all to see it was a true Conservative local plan, as by the end it favoured large growth in the towns and sacrificed the green belt nearby, rather than allow any growth in the villages. The leader by this point had a large grin on his face like a Cheshire cat. They had what they wanted. As an opposition councillor, we are outnumbered by the administration in these meetings when it comes to a vote. So in 2017, the plan submitted could only have been a Conservative local plan and nothing else. Since then, you'll hear that this new proposed plan has been approved by all parties. However, this isn't true. The stand I took at the last CPPP meeting was in favour of a reduced OAN with the Cabinet to finalise final site selection. The proposed plan tonight is just a titivated rehash of the original plan, with the exception of the removal of Simon's Hyde. The council isn't allowed to make any major changes to the plan, and even if it could, it wouldn't, as it would mean having to build in the Conservative heartlands. I've often said in CPPP meetings that the local plan process is broken, but in truth it was never properly thought out in the first place. The process it took over, regional planning, allowed for compulsory land purchase to happen, which in turn allowed for towns and villages to be properly thought out, growth in correct areas and infrastructure to be planned in from the beginning. Now we have a system that we need to wait for prospective developers to put forward areas of land that they want to profit from and try and pick any of these areas to suit. So in as much as the plan before you has been picked by the local Conservative group, the rules by which they have to pick these areas were made by our very own Conservative MP, Grant Shapps, then Housing Minister. The whole local plan process is a political choice, and the only way it was ever going to change would have been through the ballot box and a change of politicians, but this never happened. So we're now stuck with a Conservative local plan costing £9 million and taking over 12 years, which the majority don't want, very likely to be thrown out unsound by the inspector. I bet the wolves in developers' clothing can't wait.
Thank you, Lynn. Councillor Rohali.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I, being the appointed representative of Welwyn Hatfield, would like to make my standing very clear on the presented planning, once again as I did in the previously held CPP on the 13th January. I definitely do not support the idea of 15,200 dwellings. I do not compromise to accept on the so-called enforced idea of 13,277 or 13,279 dwelling, optioned by the leading party when clearly, as we all have witnessed, that their own government finds difficulty following their set rules. We initially refused the offer of 13,277 dwelling made due to high harm categories, use of green belts, including the idea of Simonside. We do not, I repeat, do not compromise and ignore the need for housing. However, we cannot accept this misproportionate distribution on sites, clearly due to such planning that can cause greater harm in future to our residents and Welwyn Garden City heritage. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask for some clarification, actually. What I haven't heard yet from anybody else is some alternative numbers. Everyone's against the 15,000. You don't want the 13,000. You don't want the 13,000. Have we got any other proposals? So we'll go to Councillor Holloway first. Thank you.
Thank you for that bizarre intervention, Mr. Mayor. I think it's rich that just as we're expected to believe the Prime Minister was recently ambushed by a cake, that members opposite expect us all to believe that the Conservatives have been ambushed by the outcome of this plan, a plan they've been designing for 12 years. They may be making noises opposing it now in this endgame, but the die was cast years ago by this administration, and members on this side of the chamber have been consistently calling them out on it. It's so disappointing to see such an unbalanced plan being presented. It does nothing to address the concerns around travel infrastructure, no plans for schools, to which we'll have to wait in the hope that a developer stumps up the cash for one if happy with their profit margin, and no thought for countless other amenities that we would need to accommodate such an increase in population. But really, should we be disappointed and surprised that a party funded by property developers fails to make decisive interventions to their detriment and in the interests of the people of Welwyn Hatfield? Probably not. You've heard from colleagues that this local plan could have been approached differently. We could have been seeing a plan for development that's sympathetic to the founding ideals of the Garden City, could be seeing a fairer plan, one that approaches the spread of development across all of the constituency, and that puts the need of all of the community in mind, not just the village, in which many of the councillors opposite happen to represent. But this isn't the case, and it's not the plan that's before us. The plan before us represents 12 years of this administration's attempts to seemingly avoid development in their own back gardens, recent reductions in the numbers further preserve areas such as Brookmans Park, Little Heath and Northaw, while leaving Welwyn Garden City and Hatfield to bear the brunt of future development. Recent changes ignore the planning inspector's comments, and this administration clings in vain to the irresponsible hope that some minister will, on the back of an offhand comment by the Prime Minister, sweep in to save them. Well, that's not going to happen. This plan does nothing to protect the unique character of Welwyn Garden City. It certainly does nothing to instill confidence in my residents that this council has their best interests at heart, and ultimately, in its current form, does nothing to deliver the development we need in a way that residents can be proud of. I cannot support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holloway. Councillor Musk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to take this back. I'm not going to call it the local plan. I'm going to call it the least worst plan, as named by one of the administration's previous councillors when it was voted through in May 2017. The least worst plan, not the best plan that would have been for Welwyn and Hatfield and residents. There is no denying we are in a housing crisis. Can't be ignored, cannot be denied. But the housing we need isn't to put postage stamp-sized flats in places like Broadwater. I grew up in a council house in Welwyn Garden City. I had a garden, I had a school, I had doctors, and these are the things that we are going to remove from children growing up in our garden city, just to pay the developers who pay money into this administration, whether it be local, county or government. I commend Councillor Bell's faith in Prime Minister Johnson, considering he already said that he didn't attend parties. It's a bit of an awkward one, whether he's going to come back on what he said. I want a plan that is fit for children growing up, fit for the future, and this plan has never been and never will be fit for those people who desperately need housing and homes, houses with gardens and not flats.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Marsh, Frank.
Yeah, hello. I think what we're forgetting here throughout this discussion are the principles of the Garden City. They seem to have gone out the window here. If we accept this plan, we'll never return to Garden City status ever again. And that's the main point here. We are going to have high density, and it should apply, the Garden City principles should not only apply to where we are now, but for the whole of the borough, so to build sustainable, decent housing for individuals. Not forget to mention as well, affordable homes and social housing, which is really necessary if we are going to build housing. These are the principles we should be looking at when deciding anything, and I don't think this plan will allow it. So I'm voting against.
Thank you. Councillor Sikowski again, please.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to respond, really. You said, we haven't heard numbers from the opposition. Well, I'll give you a number, although it's not a number of houses. The number is 10. And it's about the number of years that question is too late, actually. It's about 10 years too late to be asking us what our numbers would be instead. You're actually really coming to this stage and saying to us, what's your alternative? You're a bit late. We already proposed our alternative back in 2008. Some of you around this room will remember the charrette. The charrette that proposed a new garden city with all the necessary infrastructure, all the necessary transport, all the necessary schools and doctors and so on. There was even a proposal as to where it should be. And under the thing called duty to cooperate, we could have utilised the development of that site to offset some of the housing numbers that we currently face. But it was rubbish. It was a bad idea because it was proposed by us. It wasn't taken forward until apparently this year. It's now being taken forward for the next iteration of the local plans, where all of a sudden the idea of cooperating in larger blocks and actually delivering a garden city is all of a sudden a good idea. So I say to you, you're too late to be asking that kind of question. A long, long time too late.
Okay. Unfortunately, I wasn't here 10 years ago to ask you that question. So, maybe I arrived at the right time. Councillor Shah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure if you're allowed to speak twice in the full council. So, Councillor Thusu and Councillor Zukoski, they both spoke twice.
You can. It's not a motion. It's a debate.
Thank you, Chair. Now, I just like to echo some of the what my colleague said recently. The inspector clearly instructed the council that he will not accept anything below 15,200 dwellings. So I'm not sure he's not unreasonable. He also suggested that there shouldn't be any allocation to the Simon's Hyde until all the options have been exhausted, even though the report put Simon's Hyde into option D, which was rejected by everyone. The inspector also clearly suggested that the site distribution should be proportionate within the other villages. There are growing concerns that the site allocation in the villages are not being assessed or presented consistently. This is causing big problems. Some other villages' sites are more suitable and sustainable. They all have railway stations, they all have schools, they have shops as well. The opportunity in and around the Hatfield and Welwyn Garden City has been largely exhausted. Therefore, I do share same concerns and sentiment as many locals in Hatfield and Welwyn Garden City. In the past CPPP meetings, I have said many times about the Brookmans Park and why would it is required to accept greater proportion of new dwellings in Brookmans Park. And I'll tell you why. If you look at the Brookmans Park, because it has a large railway station, similar size at Porter's Bar, Hatfield and Welwyn Garden City. It has a primary school, and I believe it will be expanded to the two-form entry school. It also has a secondary school. This is the only village which has a secondary school within the village. Brookmans Park has numerous shops, post office, libraries, pubs, restaurants, church, golf clubs, tennis clubs. It also has a substantial parklands and public open spaces. Brookmans Park is the home for the Royal Veterinary College, which employs 600 people. Therefore, Mr. Mayor, this council must act in the best interest of the whole community. I can't see this is community-driven. The community has not been involved to make the plan sound in accordance with the clear advice from the inspector. And I don't think so I'll be supporting this plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, the plan is flawed and there's no getting away from it, whether we went for 13,279 or 15,200. The whole thing is flawed. We've heard lots of people saying how we should be doing it, but at the end of the day, perhaps we should compromise, and this is where we are. We have to work with what we've got, was said by the last speaker. I don't agree. I think that's just to accept a second-rate plan and say, well, let's just do what we can. When all the time we've got residents up in arms about the Broadwater development, the high density, the tower blocks, the fact that these developments have got nothing to do with the Welwyn Garden City ethos. And Ebenezer Howard has just been mentioned. Well, he had a vision. There's no vision here. This is just higgledy-piggledy. Let's do this, let's do that. And we've all seen, I think we've all seen, or most of us have seen, what the Conservatives are doing with the southern villages. It's just a ruse to keep those out of the plan, even though they've been, the southern villages have been designated as sound for the plan. So I think we have to look our residents in the eye. That's something one of the Conservatives said. We do need to listen to our residents. Again, one of the Conservative councillors said that. We need to listen to the views of our residents. And we've all had the emails about the Broadwater plan. And I think the best we can do is to just say no, reject both the 13,000 proposal and the 15,000 proposal, and fight to get a properly democratic plan where people, the residents who care very much about their borough, get a proper say, and we get some affordable homes and proper infrastructure, and just reject this whole flawed plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be very brief. just coming back to Councillor Hellier's comments, it's not a no to new houses, it's a no to a plan that doesn't work, damages the community and residents aren't happy with. It's a rejection of an unbalanced plan that skews development at the detriment of Welwyn Garden City and Hatfield. To come back to Councillor Tusu, actually in 2021, 20% of donations given to the Conservative Party came from property tycoons. That equated to £60 million. And finally, I think Councillor Bolton would be well-minded to remember that there is actually a cap on the number of members of the public that can attend this evening, and instead of disparaging members of the public from taking an interest in dealings of the Council, we should welcome them here and we should appreciate their input. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holloway. Councillor Musk.
I would just like to follow up on a couple of points raised, namely Councillor Bolton. Yes, I have asked for houses with gardens because, as Councillor Thusi has pointed out, we are in a changed way of living, changed way of working. We cannot have children having rickets because they are in Victorian slums. And yes, so we do need gardens. We are also in a climate emergency. This would go to offset that. And Councillor Lake, yes, lots of people can't afford to own. I can't afford to own either. I grew up in a council house and we need those council houses back. That is what we want better. That is the vision, and having something better than what we are giving to the public.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sikowski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to correct an inaccuracy that Councillor Bolton made in his speech just now, because he said quite clearly the council does not own sites. And that is demonstrably untrue, in that one of the sites that the council owns is in my ward, Hollyfield. It's a garage site that is in the submitted local plan, which I'm sure the officers can actually advise you. I also say that the council is actually quite a significant landowner and actually has a range of different pieces of land around the borough that, for whatever reason, have not come forward for development. Now, last February, we proposed a proposal to build on 200 properties on partially used garage sites. We will be doing that again in a week's time. Now, there are 200 houses that are distributed equally around the borough, that are on sites that are significantly underused, and that this council owns, but are not in this plan. Now, you might think that that is a sniping and a carping approach. I've proposed over years a series of options and alternatives, and what I've got is superciliousness and dismissiveness in response. So I find it quite offensive that you would use those terms when we're in this situation.
Thank you. Councillor Platt.
Thank you, Mayor. Don't worry, mine's just a quick one. I'd also like to just mention something and reply to Councillor Bolton. Feels a bit like we're picking on him, but... Councillor Bolton is correct when he says there are dwellings approved on Broadwater Road. He's absolutely correct. But it's just worth saying that the amount of dwellings that are approved on Broadwater Road at this time is about 1,400. Within this plan, just on Broadwater Road West, there's 2,424. So it goes up by 1,000. So actually, just to say there are already dwellings approved is slightly misleading in relation to this plan. Secondly, and just very quickly to the Conservative councillor who just mentioned that he was looking for a house in Welwyn Garden City and it's hard to find. It is, you're absolutely right, it is very hard to find a house in Welwyn Garden City, and it surprises me he'd vote for a plan that actually has no houses in the centre of Welwyn Garden City in it. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're now going to move to a vote. So we'll use electronic voting. and it's, does the council agree the recommendation? And the recommendation from Cabinet was that full council agree the proposed dwelling numbers of 13,279, which can be formed from sites which the inspector found sound. So we use the voting buttons on the microphones. If you're voting for the recommendation, it's the plus. If you're voting against the recommendation, it's the minus. And if you're abstaining, it's the middle 0 button. So cast your votes now, please. Has everybody voted? Councillor Jonathan Bolton, have you voted yet? And that is everybody having voted. So the votes for is 25 and votes against is 13. Yeah, so do you want me to? It is, yes, it is on the screen, yeah, save me. I can read them out, but you'll get bored with it. Okay. All right, and there are no abstentions. So the recommendation is carried.